You are entering a profession that has a long, rich heritage. Perhaps even longer than you may realize. We can make some educated guesses about law enforcement practices way back in prehistoric times. Early man lived in single-family units, but soon began to move into groups or tribes for mutual protection. But, of course, there were some associated disadvantages. They soon discovered the need for rules or laws to regulate conduct. The first recorded laws come from the Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia, around the 20th century BC. The Sumerian civilization was organized into city-states, each having its own laws. By this time, men had learned that merely establishing laws didn't ensure that they would be obeyed. Enforcement became a necessity. 2 centuries later, the Babylonians conquered this region and began to adapt the Sumerian civilization to their own needs. King Hammurabi established the lex talionis because he believed that laws should be uniform throughout his new empire. These became one of the first sets of codified laws. Inflicting injury of any kind upon others was forbidden by law, and punishment was severe. An eye for an eye. During the 14th century BC, another civilization was developing across the Arabian desert. Pharaoh Amenhotep believed that the key to controlling society lay in the control of the Nile River. He organized the first known police organization, the River Security Unit, to ensure safe navigation. Yet the roads and cities were extremely dangerous. Robbers, murderers, and highwaymen made travel very hazardous. The police were given greater authority by Ramses III in an effort to obtain public peace. They tried cases, passed judgments, and executed sentences. The most important police units guarded tombs. Egyptians are thought to be the first to use dogs for police purposes. Across the Mediterranean Sea, the Greek civilization was rapidly developing. They began with a kin police system. A man was avenged by his kin. It was quite effective at that time. However, as society became more complex, the famous city-states evolved, each with its own separate laws. About 600 BC, Prime Minister Draco was able to codify these laws, making them uniform throughout Greece. Yet the Greeks still maintained their belief in the individual citizen's responsibility to apprehend, prosecute, and punish criminals. The eventual decline of the Greek Empire was due in part to the inability of their law enforcement system to cope with internal problems. Rome's legal history began in the 6th century BC with the drawing up of the Roman law of the 12 tablets. The crude military force of the Roman legions provided the only law enforcement for almost 500 years. Then, in 27 BC, Caesar Augustus created the Praetorian Guard to reduce the power of the legions. The Guard served as a backup military unit for the urban cohorts who were soldiers with both military and police duties. They shared daytime patrols with a third corps, the Vigiles, who were at first firemen, but later policemen with firefighting and night patrol duties. As long as the police system was able to enforce the law, the Roman Empire enjoyed order and prosperity. When law enforcement weakened, Rome suffered from chaos and disorder and was unable to resist the barbarian invasions in the 5th century AD. When Europe retreated into the Dark Ages, organized police systems disappeared. Eventually, a law enforcement mechanism started to emerge. The English frank pledge or tithing system of the 9th century. Under the tithing system, the Shire Reeve controlled the militia and the entire civil force of the Shire. Through sloppy pronunciation, this evolved into the word we use today for sheriff. Every man in a tithing was bound by his pledge to answer for the good behavior of others. Each free man served for 1 year as chief tithing man. He would raise the hue and cry when a felon was at large, and he and other citizens would try to apprehend the suspect. This was one of the first forms of citizens' arrest. The hue and cry system worked well until men began hiring someone else to take their turns as tithing men. In many cases, those hired were thieves or otherwise unsuited to the tithing man's job. Yet the system persisted well into the 18th century. Lawlessness and crime flourished. In 1780, mobs in London destroyed chapels and houses, burned the jail, and released the prisoners. The military was brought in to assist helpless constables. But since the British people hated the military, it only served to increase their anger. Finally, the London Metropolitan Police was conceived and established by Sir Robert Peel in 1829. It was the first paid and uniformed police force in the Western world. Peel was the first to recognize that police cannot exist without public approval and acceptance of their existence. He developed a number of principles regarding police professionalism which are still used today. Within 2 months, 3,000 recruits had received their instructions and were ready to assume their duties. At first, they were received with hostility and derision. Londoners invented nicknames like Peeler and Bobby to express their feelings. But Peel had trained his men well. They met abuse, insults, and personal danger with composure, courage, good humor, and a sense of fair play. Within a few years, they had brought peace and security to a city which had been lawless for centuries. They had won the affection of Londoners and the admiration of the rest of the world. In America, the law enforcement system suffered many of the same growing pains. At first, the old hue and cry system was used. It was followed by the watch and ward system. The ward consisted of a daytime patrol by the parish constable, who also provided the news to citizens. At night, citizens took turns at watch, crying the time of night and the weather. In 1833, Philadelphia instituted the first full-time paid police force in America, consisting of 24 men. Other cities quickly followed suit. But these handfuls of men were unable to cope with a series of riots which swept the country in the 1830s. To make matters worse, the American police were beset with internal problems. Extortion of money from prisoners, releasing prisoners, refusal to go on patrol, and drunkenness occurred. Since captains and policemen were appointed from local wards, the forces were saturated with politics. In the 1850s, when control and administration were placed in the hands of police boards, the situation improved. In 1885, the Pendleton Act, or Civil Service Act, was passed. The development of Civil Service Commission concept further reduced political influence and set up uniform professional standards for police. The turn of the century brought dramatic changes in police activities. In 1850, law enforcement in Los Angeles consisted of a city marshal and 100 volunteers called the Los Angeles Rangers. At that time, Los Angeles, with a population of around 1,600, was considered the toughest town in the West. There were 400 gambling halls in the section known as the Plaza. Fights were common, and deaths by violence averaged at least 1 per day. The first city jail was located on what is now Spring Street, between the Hall of Justice and the Federal Building. By 1885, the force had become a paid city organization with regular uniforms and specific duties. Los Angeles had a new city hall, and in 1890, a records bureau was created. All police officers were required to write reports of their daily activities. The turn of the century brought innovations in transportation. The flying squad gave officers more speed in responding to emergency calls. An electric patrol wagon called the Flying Buggy was added to the force, and soon after, big gasoline-powered police cars appeared on the streets of Los Angeles. The motorcycle was quickly recognized as the ideal vehicle to cope with Los Angeles' growing traffic problems. The equipment was constantly updated to keep pace with the times. In 1925, the police academy began with the training at the pistol range in Elysian Park. Today, the Los Angeles Police Department has a force of over 7,000 officers and 3,000 civilians charged with the responsibility of protecting and serving millions of residents and visitors. The state-of-the-art in police methods and technology is now a recognized science, and today's Los Angeles police officer is recognized as the best equipped, best trained in the world. You are about to become a Los Angeles police officer. You will inherit its tradition and its responsibilities. The challenge is yours.